Welcome to the Floodgate podcast. I'm your host, Ramzy Baroud. Today's podcast is a special live edition where we are going to be taking some of your questions and discussing some issues of direct relevance to the news of today. The first piece of news we are going to be looking at here today is that of the very important and some would even say historical meeting between Iranian representatives and American mediators in Muscat, the capital of Oman. The meeting was described as friendly, not necessarily constructive as of yet, but the fact that it did not end at a negative tone or did not end with fiery statements by the American side saying that there is absolutely no room for or no overlapping uh, uh, space for Iran and the United States to find common ground. None of this happened. To the contrary, Iranian and Omani news media that we've checked with earlier today said that there was an exchange, a friendly exchange between the American and the Iranian delegations at one point following the indirect talks. They spoke for a few minutes. It was a friendly kind of meeting that was arranged by the Omani minister who was present during the talks. Now, what does it mean? We know that there would be another round of negotiations that is scheduled for next week. In a statement, Iran's foreign minister said that the two sides exchanged views about Iran's peaceful nuclear program, particularly the removal of illegal sanctions against Iran. Of course, the Americans have their own interpretation of what has been achieved or what they plan to achieve as a result of these talks. Um, but we know that for now, the focus is the subject of Iran nuclear capabilities. Iran says these are done for peace purposes. The Americans are making claims that Iran plans to develop weapons of mass destruction, which is essentially the Israeli narrative. So, in other words, the Americans have taken on or have adopted and embraced the Israeli viewpoint on the issue and have behaved regarding Iran with the kind of animosity that Israel has been perceiving Iran not for years, but rather for decades. So, is this a historical event? In a sense, it is. I would say for sure that there are winners and losers from the very first day of these negotiations, regardless of what happens in the future. The winners, obviously, is Iranian diplomacy. The Iran nuclear pact was signed between the United States and other Western countries in the presence and mediation of other entities and the UN and Iran. On the one hand, that was in 2015. Donald Trump has made the cancellation of that treaty that was signed between the Iranian government and the Obama administration, made it kind of the raison d'etre, if you will, of American foreign policy. That when he is a president, he will cancel this meeting and immediately. So, and indeed, that's what happened. 2018, Trump canceled the Iran treaty and kind of sent the whole region into kind of hurtling towards the same kind of uncertainty that existed prior to that meeting. Netanyahu has so that particular event as kind of the jewel on the crown of Israel's dominance, not only dominance over the Middle East, but dominance over American foreign policy as well. So you can imagine that Netanyahu has been cashing or capitalizing on that achievement for years. He is the man who single handedly swayed. I mean, there's one thing that you lobby American foreign policy to achieve what you want in advance, but it's a whole different process of reversing established American foreign policy. It took years for the Obama administration and previous administrations to reach that conclusion that the only way out of this is to sign a deal with Iran. What did Netanyahu do at the time? He challenged Obama, he challenged the US administration, and he goes to the Congress and he gives a speech at the US Congress that brought the Democrats and the Republicans together in very strange, bizarre scene akin to that of the final scene of of um, of Orwell's Animal Farm, where basically both sides clapped and clapped for Netanyahu, while the president of the United States was himself isolated as a result of the Netanyahu's basically declaring himself to be ultimately the emperor. He is the one who was determining the most important junctures of U.S. foreign policy. To see that the very Trump that really kind of played into Netanyahu's hands in the first round of or the first term of his office, coming back in the second term, and one of his earliest moves is to go back to the talks that he had intentionally dismissed and canceled by canceling the agreement. So, needless to say, that this is indeed a victory for Iranian foreign policy. If you look at Iranian media, Press TV, and others, you will find that the Iranians are taking a great deal of pride in the fact that that they are back, kind of not only talking to the Americans through the Europeans and others, talking to the Americans more or less directly. I mean, the whole idea of is this direct or indirect negotiations is to be decided. Most likely, if this continues and the kind of the friendly language associated with these meetings and this dialogue continues to be used, then most likely the indirect or semi-indirect talks will become direct in the future. And that is definitely a defeat for the Netanyahu government. And that's kind of really not only defeat for the Netanyahu government now, and he really does not need the defeat considering the fact that he's already isolated and emasculated within his own country and quite isolated internationally as well. So this is to be determined. We don't know if the Netanyahu's allies in Congress and in the lobby, the powerful Zionist lobby in Washington D.C., are able to kind of turn the tables and Bush, or rather push the Trump administration back to the starting point, which is the total isolation of Iran at the expense of American foreign policy in the region and beyond. The second question we are going to be looking at here is that will that mean that there's going to be some movement regarding the ceasefire in Gaza? Now, this is a little bit complicated. Now we are hearing that Israel is making some concessions, and they are ready to go back to negotiations with Hamas, and they are ready to return to the ceasefire. Let's just remember the sequence of events here. Hamas did not violate the ceasefires. The Palestinian resistance movement did not violate the ceasefire. Palestine did not, defy the ceasefire. It was Israel that single-handedly, and by the admission of the Israelis themselves, I don't think that even within mainstream Israeli media analysis, anybody is saying that it was the Palestinians who violated the ceasefire. The ceasefire was achieved in January of this year, was violated by Israel in March, and the genocide of the Palestinians continued. Now Israel is saying, well, we are actually ready to speak seriously about a permanent or a permanent ceasefire. Of course, when you kind of behave with this kind of attitude, total disrespect for international law, total disrespect for humanitarian laws, disrespect for the very agreement that you signed and initialed, Palestinians at this point do not believe what the Israelis are saying. They do not believe what the Americans are saying on behalf of Israel. We've been here before. We've been here before many, many times. And each time it's Israel that continues to advance whatever military strategies that they have in Gaza. And in my opinion, they will not be able to achieve any of these strategies, but that's essentially what it is. They are talking about the return to the ceasefire, but as far as the Palestinians are concerned, the state of genocide will continue until all Israeli troops, to the last one, pull out of Gaza, and until accountability is finally achieved, and until there are real and serious guarantees that Israel will not resume its genocide of the Palestinian civilians in the Gaza Strip. So at this point, we need to continue to talk about the genocide in active terms. Let's not buy into this propaganda that Israel is serious in any way about the ceasefire. In my opinion, the ceasefire in Gaza, or the potential return to a ceasefire in Gaza, is linked directly to what is happening with Iran. And I'll tell you. So now the Americans, or Trump in particular, is saying to Iran, listen, I'm going to give you 60 days, 2 months, to achieve this agreement or this new pact. And if you don't, then we are going to go back, or we are going to use the military option. I don't think the Americans are going to use the military options. It just would be total insanity to shut down the Bab el Mandeb and the Hormuz Strait and completely jeopardize the global trade routes at the time that the Americans are launching a global war on China and other countries. It just doesn't make sense. And as Tucker Carlson, not a big fan myself, but he and other conservative commentators within the US, within the Trump administration, or the whole MAGA movement, they rightly see that indeed anyone who demands a war against Iran is an enemy of the United States. And I think many elements of the US administration believes in that. But what Trump wants, he wants some sort of quiet in the region until the negotiations kind of determine whatever outcome he's looking for. So that's why I think the Netanyahu is willing to talk ceasefire again, because they are talking about 45, 50 days of quiet, more or less that the same period of time that will, the Americans need to also determine whether they are able to achieve an agreement with Iran or not. So I think there is some sort of kind of transactional diplomacy going on here between the Americans and the Israelis. I think these two issues are very much linked. I think those who are discussing the Iran-US talks in Oman in total separation from the indirect Hamas-Israel talks in Egypt, I think they are missing the point here. I think the two issues are very, very much linked. As far as Hamas is concerned, they said, yes, we are sending a delegation to Egypt, but we have not received any formal proposal. And I think that's, in a sense, kind of is already telling us certain things. Why would the main party involved in the talks not receive a proposal, while the Israelis have already kind of are advancing, moving forward with the discussion on a ceasefire, and the fact that the government is quite serious, and the small cabinet, the security cabinet in Israel, are kind of giving their approval that this time we have to move forward. And so they are having this kind of one-sided conversation on a ceasefire involving the Egyptians and the Americans. But the Palestinians, who are the ones who are the most important party in all of this, they are not part of the conversation. I think that tells us something about the nature of this ceasefire. So we are not being optimistic about it, but for a good reason. For 18 months now, Israel has been slaughtering Palestinians. Hundreds of thousands have been killed, wounded, or are missing, and by estimations, that more pessimist estimations, the number is much higher than what is being declared, which is about 166,000 between dead and wounded, and over 14,000 who are missing. So until this reality stops, until the genocide ends, we cannot kind of fall into the trap of pretending that yes, the ceasefire is at the horizon, or the around the corner, and everything is going to be okay. No, it's not going to be okay. Palestine is suffering. Gaza is bleeding. The genocide is real. It's taking place on a daily, hourly basis. Rafah is completely being besieged right now by the Israeli military. So they have a state of siege within siege. All of Gaza is under siege. Imagine having an area like Rafah that has been completely flattened, and that now it is under siege as well by the Israeli army. So until this reality changes, any talk about ceasefire and potential ceasefire really should not mean much to us at the moment. Some of the questions that are being asked, and some of our readers have been asking this specific question: what's happening? Why the news that we heard all this news about the resistance? Of the Palestine Chronicle, we had a daily resistance roundup. discussing, what the statements of the resistance on a daily basis in Gaza, be it Islamist or socialist or any others. Why haven't we seen much of that as of late? Well, there's a very simple answer to that question. Israel's territorial gains, or so-called territorial gains in Gaza, it's essentially the expansion of the so-called buffer zone from the northern and eastern boundaries, and also through the Philadelphia corridor. Um, but these are areas that are largely uninhabited, largely destroyed, exposed, open to Israeli aircrafts and Israeli drones and Israeli soldiers with their binoculars and their, radars and all of that. So naturally, the resistance has decided to change its strategies, not to expose itself, for Israel to be able to, strike at will. This is a new strategy that has been used since Israel's return to war in March. And I think this strategy will continue until Israel decides to enter into the relatively inhabited areas. And when I say inhabited, I'm not really talking about areas that are, where you have constructions and buildings and homes and schools, because the vast majority of Gaza has been destroyed. I'm talking about areas that where people are just basically living in encampments, in tents, whether in Al Mawasi or the Shati area, Jabalia, Zaytun, Gaza City itself, and so forth and so on. So I think this is kind of part of the change of the strategy. Perhaps the Palestinians are still hoping that they are able to achieve a permanent ceasefire, and they do not want to give Israel the reasoning to go into kind of full mode of genocide. And I know some of you might protest the term in the sense that every day is a day of genocide in Gaza, but we have witnessed days earlier where Israel used to kill 800 and 1,000 Palestinians a day. So perhaps there is still that hope that maybe the ceasefire can be achieved without having to go back to that period of the fighting. But I think if Israel persists and insists and return to urban warfare, most likely the resistance would be ready. In fact, based on various reports coming out of Gaza, it seems that the degree of preparedness has increased to. Now, the Israelis are claiming that the resistance has managed to recruit another 40,000 or a total of 40,000 soldiers, which is pretty much this, the Israeli estimation of the power of the resistance on October 7th, 2023. I don't know how they achieved that number. I mean, clearly, Israeli intelligence is very blindsided in Gaza. They don't know much about what is happening in Gaza. So, how do they get these numbers? I do not know. And no one can really confirm. But the fact is, it is clear that the resistance is very much ready and capable of fighting and kind of a prolonged stage of the war, shall Israel decide to return to a full scale warfare in the Strip. So, that will take us to the next subject, which is the unity of the squares, the idea that Israel can only be fought through a unified front that at one point included Hezbollah in Lebanon, Ansarullah in Yemen, and other entities. So what happened since then? I still think that very much Hezbollah is involved in this battle, but they have their own political calculations in Lebanon. And the idea that unity of the squares is essential for any confrontation with Israel does not necessarily mean that any of these groups shall, commit national suicide. Hezbollah is a very lives in a very complex political environment, and quite often the enemies from within can be even more powerful than the enemies from without. So Hezbollah has kind of reached some sort of a conclusion of abstaining for the time being from the battle to deal with its own political environment, while Ansarullah in Yemen continue to operate, and they really kind of prove to be the unbreakable bond or the unbreakable component of the unified Arab resistance in the region. I mean, we have seen what the Americans have done, the American, British, Western coalitions that sadly involve some Arab countries that have been bombing Yemen, quite frequently since its beginning months ago. And yet, not only they have failed to achieve any of their objectives, to the contrary, they have actually strengthened Ansarullah's position within Yemen and strengthened the Ansarullah's position within the Arab world. I mean, who knew? I mean, only the matter of few years ago that people became familiar with the term, the Houthis, a reference to Ansarullah. They don't prefer this particular term. It is Ansarullah, since they don't see themselves as a cult that belongs to us, a single family. But that's the fact of it, is that Ansarullah managed to achieve a great deal of political significance in Yemen and legitimacy throughout the Arab world like no one else. They are the ones who stood from the very beginning and kind of presented the kind of solidarity that kind of rarely existed in the Middle East and in the Arab world for decades. I would say, maybe going back to the days of Jamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt and that kind of age of pan-Arab socialist unity that existed in the 60s and, in the 50s and 60s. We haven't experienced that in a long time, and it seems like Ansarullah is once more breathing life in the idea that Arabs can, in fact, be unified and can be, kind of serious and committed to Palestine, and they are willing to pay any price imaginable for that commitment. So that's really what's going on with Ansarullah, and the fact that there were like few days in which we didn't report at the Palestine Chronicle about any Ansarullah rockets or missiles, whether targeting ships in the Red Sea or Israeli targets as well. And I think part of this is related to the announcement by Trump that he will be resuming talks with Iran. And I think they wanted to kind of create a little bit of geopolitical space for Iran and, as a major ally of Ansarullah in the Middle East, to kind of operate diplomatically. But there was a point, and I think this is why Hezbollah or Ansarullah came back to the fighting. There was a specific point in which the Americans were expecting that Ansarullah will be a point of the dialogues, meaning that they wanted Iran to stop Ansarullah from behaving in solidarity with Gaza and, in their view, endangering the trade and the shipping lanes of the Red Sea. And I think Ansarullah's attack on Israel in recent hours is kind of Ansarullah's way of saying we are able to speak for ourselves. We are our own independent political entity, and we are able to behave based on the geopolitical interest of Ansarullah or Yemen, the way we see it. So I think that message must have been made clear and understood by Israel and the United States to be as such. So I suggest to the American envoys or diplomats participating in the Iran talks to de-link both issues, because the road to ending the strife in the Red Sea doesn't go through Iran or Tehran; it actually goes through Gaza. And I think that's something that Ansarullah has made clear from the very, very start. You want Ansarullah to stop, kind of disrupting the shipping lanes in the Red Sea. You want them to stop targeting Israeli-bound ships or Israeli targets as well. Then you need to end the starvation of the Palestinians. You need to break the siege on the Palestinians, and you need to stop the war on Gaza. So just in case anybody is getting confused why Ansarullah has decided to do this in the first place. Now that takes us, within the same context. Let's just talk briefly about what happened when Netanyahu was summoned, rather, when he was in Hungary, was summoned by the Trump administration. That's how we understood it. That's how mainstream Israeli media understood it, and many others. That Netanyahu was summoned by Trump to go to the White House, not knowing why he was going in the first place. And the answer was, well, Netanyahu wanted us to believe that he is going there to discuss various issues, including the increased tariffs that the Trump administration put on his country and numerous other countries around the world. So he thought maybe he could turn this visit into something that would allow him to talk about the special status of Israel in American eyes and the unbreakable bond between Israel and the United States and that sort of thing. So, in other words, kind of use it as another victory lap sort of thing, and talk about why Israel remains the exception. He did not get that. He did not get anything from Washington. All that he got is an announcement that Washington is going to be going to talk to Iran directly, and Israel is not going to be involved in that decision-making process. Now, if that really remains to be the case, then definitely a historical moment in the sense that American foreign policy has been linked to Israeli foreign policy for many, many years. Some people would say as early as 1967, others would say as early as the 1980s, particularly when the Israeli lobby became so powerful and so entrenched in Washington, D.C., and began controlling American domestic attitude towards Israel and the Middle East in general. So again, that we just have to wait and see what is happening at that front. So this is really, really important. And I think if you look at the body language of Netanyahu at the meeting, I mean, just think about the way he usually kind of have this erect, he erects his back and he's, kind of spread his legs in this weird way. And he kind of moves his hands, kind of opens his arms as if he is the man in charge. He is the man in control. He tried that in the previous visit, and I feel like he kind of earned it because Trump played around that principle that Netanyahu was very, very important to the United States. And there was that famous scene of him pulling the chair for Netanyahu to sit down as he was signing some sort of agreement. This time around, I think Netanyahu tried to play that game again. It didn't work very well. He was nervous. His eyes were shifting left and right. And he was quite surprised and puzzled by some of the stuff that were said. And again, of course, Trump repeated the same mantra about the good deal of Palestinians leaving Gaza and, real state and all that absolute rubbish. But then he also talked about ending the war. So he kind of went into this very strange, conflicting discourse that has defined U.S. foreign policy under the Trump administration. So he's kind of leaving us with so many different ways of looking at this situation. But maybe because the situation in Gaza is very desperate, we would like to see some sort of a breakup between Israel and the United States coming soon. So we'll just have to wait and see what is the situation there. Now, this is kind of interesting. This, this war against Mahmoud Khalil, student, and an activist for Palestine in the United States, as part of a much greater war on Palestinian activism or pro-Palestine activism in the United States. It's really difficult to speak about this kind of this attack, this unhinged attack on freedom of speech in this country. What is happening here is unprecedented in the history of the United States, at least the modern history of the United States, and certainly within the context of Palestine. Now, let's remember, Palestinians have always been targeted in the US, and Palestinian academics in particular. Let's not forget that once upon a time there was a law, and still a law, that eventually that essentially targeted Palestinians, called the Secret Evidence Law. And the Secret Evidence Law was based on administrative detention law of Israel used against Palestinian academics and artists and activists in the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem. And that secret evidence law eventually became kind of the vision, if you will, upon which Patriot Act, the Patriot Act 1 and Patriot Act 2 were established in the United States. So Palestinians are usually the first group of people in which America experiments its various anti-democratic laws before they apply to the rest of the American, American society. So those who are watching the story of Mahmoud Khalil and they think it doesn't concern me, this is just something related to Palestine, Israel, Arabs versus Jews, and that sort of discourse, well, you're wrong. It does concern you because it creates legal precedents, and these legal precedents with time expand to reach other people. And with time, it will include all groups in American society: Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, and everyone else. Now, the thing about Mahmoud Khalil is that he really hasn't done anything. I mean, because if he did, I mean, we would have seen it. It would have been produced, would have been leaked to American mainstream media. They love the opportunity to demonize Palestinians under any excuse. They have nothing against Mahmoud Khalil. They have nothing against many of the other Palestinians or pro-Palestinian activists, whether Turkish or Lebanese, Syrians, Egyptians, or any others who have been detained or are threatened to be deported and that sort of thing. This is a war on the freedom of speech. It's as simple as that. And by allowing this mockery to continue, we are basically allowing again this legal precedence to take place. It will be used against many of us in the future, unfortunately. So we have to be very, very vigilant regarding this particular issue. Now, another issue dealing with imprisonment is that of Ahmed Manasra. Ahmed Manasra is a Palestinian boy who, about 10 years ago, was arrested following the shooting and killing of his cousin. He was arrested, he was injured in the head badly, and he developed all sorts of issues as a result. He was tortured severely in Israel, and there are some leaked videos showing a 13-year-old boy frightened, uh, you know, um, terrified, confused, telling the Israeli soldier who was trying to, the Israeli investigator, I think Shin Bet, who was trying to exact information out of that boy without any presence of any legal representatives. Ahmed Manasra is telling him that I don't know anything. I think it was something in Arabic like ما بعرفش إشي, or I can't remember anything, or something of that nature. That incident became kind of iconic in a sense of the innocence of the Palestinian and the barbarity of the Israeli legal system. And the very legal system, by the way, that many are sadly are kind of defending now, thinking the Israeli democracy is at risk, as if the Israeli judicial system has kind of have any bright spots in its past. No, it's the very legal system that investigates and sentences children like Ahmed Manasra as if it's a normal happening in any democratic society. Ahmed Manasra is finally free. He entered as a boy and he leaves as a young man. And it's a bittersweet moment for many Palestinians. Of course, they are happy of Ahmed's freedom, but they also understand that there are over 10,000 Palestinian prisoners who remain imprisoned in Israel, including hundreds of children and women as well, and hundreds of people who have, if not really thousands, who have been not charged, administrative detainees, people who have been arrested, for their ideas, for their poetry, for their art, for their social media activities, and that sort of thing. This is the heartbreaking video of Ahmed Manasra telling the Israeli investigator of the Shin Bet, don't remember anything. Um, and I wanted to kind of look at this video and just think of how many thousands of Palestinian children went through that same process again and again and again, that we haven't seen because we don't have any videos that were leaked from these investigations. Absolute horror, absolute state-sponsored terrorism. Speaking of absolute horror, the Guterres, Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, made a particularly interesting statement, considered by some to be his strongest statements since the start of the Israeli genocide, by saying that Israel has opened floodgate of horror on Gaza. The kind of horror that is happening in Gaza, people, is the kind of things that we are really unfamiliar with. We don't know of any war, we don't know of any genocide that has kind of reached that particular point. This is not about numbers, it's not about how many people of this group, whether in Rwanda or in the Holocaust or in Namibia or others have been killed in these various types of genocides. But this is about something far more complex. You're talking about a group of people, about 2 millions of them, who are trapped in this small piece of land, about 181 square miles, if you're American, or 360 or 65 square kilometers. They have already been besieged. They have already been under this hermetic, blockade. Their calories were counted on them. They were not allowed to leave. The vast majority of Gazans before the war were not even allowed to leave Gaza, or never been outside of Gaza, not even once. And they have been under a state of siege and recurring wars. 2006, 2008, 9, 2012, 2014, 2021, 22, and so forth and so on. So they are already living in this kind of active state of genocide, and then they kind of are now experiencing a state, that same group of people, with no, in the most relentless way you can imagine, where the world is looking completely the opposite direction, and now they are experiencing a total state of extermination. So Israel wants to exterminate the Palestinians. By the way, if you are an academic out there or a media personnel that protested us using that language in the past, accusing us of being biased, of kind of misrepresenting the situation, what do you have to say now? No, really, honestly, because we have been saying the Nakba never ended. The state of ethnic cleansing of Palestinians never ended. What's happening in Palestine was a slow motion genocide. This is a state of starvation. The siege is starvation. Israel is counting the calories per Israeli media leaks on Palestinians. And we have been ignored. Mainstream media ignored us completely. In fact, we have been labeled all sorts of things. We were the radicals for speaking such unfriendly language. And now, look, everything that we have said, and unfortunately, of course, it's not like something we're proud of, or proving that we were right all along, but here we are. This is the price of our silence. This is the price of our cowardice. This is the price of looking the other way when a group of people were living under a constant state of siege, and where the dehumanizing language of Israel and the behavior of the Israeli army was preparing us. The Israelis themselves were already giving us clues that they were about to carry out a genocide in Gaza, and now they are. So exterminating Gazans in Gaza and pushing them outside Gaza is now the declared Israeli objectives, with the Americans, of course, being fully on board because of their support of Israel militarily, defense of Israel politically, and trying to find some countries, Somaliland or whatever else, Indonesia and other places, that are willing to accept Palestinian refugees. This is the floodgates of horror, as Guterres have rightly described it. Now, the question is, what do you do about this floodgate of horrors? Do you allow it to perpetuate, or do you do something about it? Those who are doing something about it are now being held accountable for that. They are losing their jobs, they are being fired from their universities, but of course, they will not stop, because this is not a personal fight, it's a collective fight for justice in Palestine, in Gaza, and really it's the fight of our time and our generation and our age. If we lose in Gaza, we lose everywhere else. So thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you for listening. And remember, the Floodgates is a weekly program where we interview leading voices, intellectuals, and artists, and academics, and international advocates, international law advocates, on a weekly basis. Usually, I am joined by my brilliant co-host, Romano Rubio, who's also the managing editor of the Palestine Chronicle. Tune in next week. We are going to have a fantastic interview with the very well-known, respected, and prolific writer and activist, Naim Gina from South Africa. Do interact with us, send us emails, suggest names of people that you think we should speak to. And thank you again for all of your support and solidarity. This was Ramzy Baroud with the Floodgates.